All right, we're going to do 2 assignments here. We're going to talk about comparing distributions. We're also going to talk about comparing data displays. All right, let's go back to the first one, comparing distributions. Let's get right to the question. Which pieces of information can be gathered from these box plots? All right, we see down below, we have 2 different box plots. A box plot tells us the beginning of the data set. That means the lowest number or the minimum is at 20 on the St. Louis one. We also know the maximum or the greatest number, which would be at somewhere around 35.5. We also know where the average is, or the mean. Mean is the same thing as average. And then these other points tell us this is what we call the first quartile, or first quarter of the data. This spot is the third quarter of the data. That's why it's split up into 3 chunks, right? Or sorry, 4 chunks. If we look, there's one part of the data. There's another part. That's the second quartile. That's the third quartile. This is the fourth quartile. We say that because if there were 100 days that they gathered here for this information, I'm just making up the number 100, there would be 25 days that ranged between 20 and 28. There would be another 25 days in here, there'd be another 25 days here, and another 25 days here. Notice the data can be spread out over the same course of time, right? So over these 25 days in my scenario, the temperatures range from 20 to 28. Over these 25 days, they're very close together, right? Imagine a dot plot where these 25 dots were all this close together. Over here, they're more spread out, right? They have to take up a much larger space. But what we would see on a dot plot is we would count 25 dots in that point. So when we look at a box plot that tells us all that information all at the same time, our average is in the middle, splitting it in half and half. The quartiles split it up in half again, right here and right here. All right, so let's read through these one more time. Choose all answers that apply. The daily high temperatures in July varied more noticeably in Washington, D.C. When they say varied, that means were they spread out more? Was the spread greater in Washington, D.C.? What we notice is when we compare these, Washington, D.C.'s go from 25-ish to 36. That's a spread of 11 degrees. However, in St. Louis, the spread is much greater. So A is not correct. Letter B, the daily high temperatures in July were hotter on average in Washington, D.C. Again, the word is average. Okay, if we look at our notes from up here, right, what's it mean to be average? On a box plot, an average is right there in the middle. Which average is greater? Washington, D.C.'s is greater. So letter B is correct. That's how we can read through these box plots. All right, let's do another assignment now, moving on to comparing data displays. Tia measured the daily high temperature in Katz, Colorado for each of the 30 days in April. She then created both a dot plot and a box plot to display the same data. Which display can be used to find how many days had a high temperature above 15 degrees? If we just look at a box plot, remember they're asking how many days. If we just look at the box plot, it says above 15, all we can tell is that this quartile, for the most part, it seems to be above 15. But we can't see how many measurements were in there. If we compare that instead to a dot plot, here's 15, we draw a line, we can count exactly how many days were observed to be above 15 degrees Celsius. So we would say the dot plot's better. The dot plot's better for actually counting how many items. The box plot's better for labeling like a certain percentage of the data. For example, which display makes it easier to see that the first quartile or the first 25%, that's what that means, is 9 degrees Celsius. Okay, we could do that on the dot plot. We could go through and we could say, all right, let's count how many dots there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then cut it in quarters, right? We could say, all right, the first half of it's probably somewhere around here. After we count up all these dots, we could say it's about there, and the first quarter is about here, and then the third quarter somewhere in here, and then we could figure it out. But guess what? They've done all the work for us in a box plot already. So if we look at the box plot, it's already split up into those different areas. So the first quartile is at 9, and we can tell right there. We don't have to do any work. So when comparing which one's easier, the box plot's way simpler. Take a look at this one. It's about histograms. Which histogram can be used to find how many houses had areas greater than 200 square meters? Again, greater than 200 square meters. There's histogram A. There's histogram B. Which of them can be used to figure out which houses had areas greater than 200? Well, we can use letter A because 200 is on the boundary, right? We can say there are 4 in this bar and there's 1 in that bar. There are 5 total houses, right? Let's see if we can answer the question here. Above 200, there are 5. Right there in between 6 and 4, there are 5 houses. We can actually use both in this case. In order to answer this question successfully, we just need to make sure that we can tell for sure that something is above a certain boundary on the histogram. If I had asked the same question about 250, can I tell how many are greater than 250? Well, on the histogram A, the answer would be yes. It would be 1 house. But down here, I can't be sure how many are above 250 because all I know is that they're in between 200 and 300. So be careful on those.